Well, if you follow any of this type of news on infectious diseases and the like, you're going to see that there's been a lot of information and news and studies concerning avian influenza or the bird flu. So there's some bird flu activity going on here in the United States, north of the border, in Europe and Africa, and there's several other places. And we're going to go ahead and get an update on this from the guy that knows avian flu very well. Joining me now is Mike Coston. Mike is a returning guest, and he runs the very informative website, Avian Flu Diary. Mike Coston, welcome back, my friend.
Oh, I'm glad to be here.
Coming across my desk and coming across yours, we were seeing a lot of bird flu activity in different geographic areas around the globe, and I thought you were the right person to talk to about this, as always. To me, you're the avian flu guru, and the one I seek out this type of information. So let's go ahead and start in the U.S. What are we seeing in the United States as of today?
Well, you'll recall that last year we had quite the bird flu outbreaks across many states and millions of birds. This year we've not had that. We've had one outbreak in Indiana back in January of a new form of bird flu we've not seen before, H7N8. It hit 11 farms. Most of them were low path or low pathogenic, but one farm was hit by a high path version. So it had mutated.
Hey, Mike, can I interrupt you? Can you explain to the audience what do you mean by low path and high path?
Sure. There are two broad classifications of bird flu. There's what is called LPAI, or low pathogenic avian influenza, and HPAI, which is highly pathogenic avian influenza. Birds carry low path bird flu viruses all the time. It doesn't hurt them. They rarely can infect humans. They're not really a big concern, except that H5 and H7 subtypes can mutate from low path to high path. And that's when it becomes dangerous not only to poultry, but potentially to people. And so we worry about low path because they have the ability to mutate. So we really worry about high path because they're already dangerous.
Sure. Okay, as you were saying.
Okay. There were reports which basically our trading partners, Japan, Taiwan, posted notices about a month ago that they were no longer accepting poultry products from certain parts of Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey, which led us on a wild goose, duck, and poultry chase. Well, we finally found out that, yes, there are live markets across the country where you can buy live birds that they butcher for you and then you take home. And much like you see in Asia and the Middle East. And there are a couple of hundred of those around the country. And they basically can be found in metropolitan areas like New York and Philadelphia and places like that. They routinely inspect these live poultry markets, and they take environmental samples, and they test them, and they found evidence of what was first reported as highly pathogenic H5 turned out to be low pathogenic. There was the report was just wrong that came out with it. But this came about a week after there was an outbreak of low path H5 on an Ontario farm. So that got us all looking pretty closely at what was going on. The good news is there's some low path out there, but it doesn't seem to have turned into high path in this country yet this year.
All right. Now, you mentioned something going on up in Canada. Apparently there was an outbreak in ducks up in Ontario?
Yeah, it was a duck farm just across the border from New York, St. Catharines in lower Ontario. And it was one duck farm. I think something like 4,400 ducks, I believe, were affected. It's a low-path H5 virus. And what's interesting is we always worry about the Asian H5, which is the one H5N1 and right. The deadly, most dangerous of the H5 viruses. This was a North American lineage, not nearly as worrisome. But it's called the same thing, but it's Not really. It's like there are a lot of people called Mike in the world, but they're not all the same. So you can have a lot of different H5s, and you can have a lot of H5N1s that are named the same but have completely different characteristics.
But Canada did take this quite seriously because they essentially put that on lockdown.
Oh, yeah, because any low-path H5 has the potential to mutate to a highly pathogenic virus.
Right.
And we've seen that happen a lot lately. We saw it happen 3 or 4 times in Europe last year, and of course we saw it in Indiana with the H7 in January. So it seems to happen more often than it used to.
What's the status up in Canada right now?
Last I heard, no other farms have had any signs of the disease, and basically it's just a waiting period where they keep the place quarantined, they eradicate the birds, and then they disinfect the premises, and then at some point they'll be allowed to restock.
Okay. Now I'm talking to Mike Coston. He runs the website Avian Flu Diary, and we're getting a bird flu update today. And now there's some activity going on in Europe, too.
Europe, much like the United States, has had a fairly quiet time with bird flu over the winter and spring, but France had a bunch of new bird flu strains show up that we'd never seen before. They were H5N1, H5N2, H5N9. Same names as some of the viruses we've seen before, but these were of a new lineage that we'd never seen before, meaning that they were descendant from different strains of bird flu. And there were like 75 outbreaks over the winter in France, and then it went quiet around April. We hadn't heard anything out of France in 3 months until this week. And all of a sudden, H5N1 is back in France with 2 departments, which are like provinces in France, reporting this new lineage of bird flu. So once again, they've got a lot of small towns and farms under quarantine, and they're trying to sort out just how bad this is going to be. It's unusual this time of year to be seeing it.
All right. Now, the UN not too long ago put out a press release concerning H5N1 in Africa, and this one sounds pretty serious, Mike. What's going on in Africa?
Well, H5N1 arrived in Africa in 2006, and it hung around for about 3 years, and then it disappeared in 2008, and that was about the end of it. There were a few, and I mean very few, human cases in Western Africa and Nigeria. One was confirmed. There were about 4 others that were presumed, but they were buried before they could be tested. But then bird flu went away in Western Africa, like it did across a lot of the world, and pretty much receded to China, Indonesia, Egypt, India, a few places like that. But we didn't see it until it came back again in 2014. It suddenly reappeared after 7 years in Western Africa, carried in, no doubt, by migratory birds. And what's interesting is it was a new clade of bird flu. A clade is like a branch on a family tree. And this is just a new family member of the H5N1.
Okay, good.
And it came from China. And we know this because genetically it is almost identical to the H5N1 that infected the nurse who came back to Canada in Alberta in December of 2013 and sadly died from H5N1. So we know that the same virus that was circulating in China in 2013 showed up in Western Africa a few months later. The problem is that it's spreading across much of West Africa, and we're talking Ghana and Cameroon and Nigeria and Benin and places like that. We don't have very good surveillance there. Very poor veterinarian surveillance and even worse human health surveillance. We've really no idea how many people may have caught this or how many people may have died from it. It's a contagious strain, but we don't have any reports of humans dying from it because nobody ever gets tested. So we presume that there are cases and deaths, that just simply fly under the radar.
Right.
It's a real concern because it has the potential to spread across the entire continent of Africa.
Now, as if Iraq didn't have enough troubles, they also have a bird flu issue. Or do they? I mean, some of the reports seem mixed. What do you know, Mike?
Well, what we know is Iraq went many years without reporting any bird flu. They had cases in 2006, several human cases, some deaths, a lot of outbreaks. And then we didn't get much information. There were always rumors in the Arabic press of large outbreaks and die-offs of poultry, but no official notifications from the Iraqi government, such as it is, until I believe it was March of this year, when they submitted a report to the United Nations OIE that they'd had 6 outbreaks of bird flu. Not a real surprise, but that's all they ever admitted to, and we've been continuing to get reports in the Arabic media of tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of poultry dying, and of shutdown of poultry trade. At one point, they were going to stop all poultry industry, all raising poultry for 3 months in one province to try to stop it. The Iraqi government, they're not really admitting much, except they say it's under control. And every couple of days they come out and say that, well, we did have bird flu, but we've taken care of it. So your guess is as good as mine, but it's pretty obvious they have a ongoing bird flu problem there, as does Egypt and most of the countries in the Middle East.
Okay. Now, I haven't been hearing a whole lot of news about the H7N9 China outbreak. Are we just not getting reports, or are they keeping hush-hush on this? What's going on in China with that right now?
China changed their policy on reporting 18 months ago. Up until February of last year, 2015, they were doing a remarkable job. I praised them often in my blog about how well and how quickly and how in-depth they were reporting on their bird flu problems. We would get practically everything you could ever want epidemiologically about these cases, date of onset, their contacts, their age, their location, gender, I mean, everything you could ever want. And then suddenly the faucet just turned off. Since then, we've been getting very sparse, often 1 or 2 or 3 months after the fact reports that summarized, that said, well, we had 11 cases last month. They don't tell us where. China's a pretty big place. It would be nice if we knew where.
Right.
So the information has been pretty slack. We received word today of 3 cases, but I know 2 of those 3 were from last month, and I think the third one is also. So we're getting, confirmation of stuff that we heard about through the grapevine in early June. There are some more clusters that have been reported this year, which is something new. Up until recently, clusters were pretty rare, but we've actually seen a number of them, both in hospitals and in families. H7N9 is one of those viruses that it's very tough to control because it shows no signs in poultry. It's a low pathogenic virus to birds. It's a high pathogenic virus to people.
Right.
And which makes us, meaning people, the first ones to fall ill. And the only way we know there's an outbreak somewhere is that people fall ill, and then they check the poultry and they say, it's in the poultry. As opposed to H5N1, where chickens start keeling over, and you've got a problem before people get sick. So it makes it very tough to eradicate and even track. And H7N9 is mutating, and the last we saw was there were 48 genotypes of H7N9 circulating in China, and that's old information. So it is quite diverse. It continues to evolve into new clades, new strains, and it's picking up mammalian adaptations. And basically that just means that as it infects humans or other mammals, and it's been infecting cats and dogs and other mammals, it learns how to better adapt to its host. And sometimes those adaptations accrue and make the virus more likely to infect a mammal down the road. And so the virus is changing slowly, and we don't know how long it's going to take from an avian virus to a more mammalian virus. And that's something we watch because, that's one of the things that you worry about with any of these viruses, that they become more biologically fit for humans.
Right. I know, and we've seen H5N1 affect mammals. We've seen tigers and lions.
Yes. The list of mammals other than man that the H5N1 infects is pretty long. I mean, we've seen dogs and cats and martins and an amazing number of small mammals have been infected by it. And we're seeing other avian flu showing up in mammals, including dogs.
Yeah.
So that's something else we're watching because the H3N8, H3N2, both of those avian strains have shown up in dogs in Korea and in China. H6N1 has showed up in dogs in Taiwan. So, if it can adapt to dogs, it's something we have to worry about also.
Sure. All right. Now, on Avian Flu Diary, one thing you do very well is you scour the different research on avian influenza. And I was just wondering, is there any research, any studies that has come across your desk that you think is worth mentioning?
Well, yeah. It's the thing I love most about what I do is I get to read all these wonderful studies and highlight them because most people would never know about them if somebody didn't do that.
Sure.
One of the things I've been focusing on has been some of the more obscure avian viruses turning up in dogs, because dogs are a companion animal. They have a lot of contact with humans. And we, absolutely have to worry about whether a virus can jump to dogs and then jump from dogs to humans. It's not that big of a jump from dogs to humans. Up until 10 years ago, we didn't even know dogs could get the flu. The first time we ever documented it, and I say we, the first time researchers did was in 2004, and it was here in Florida. There was a racetrack in South Florida where they had greyhounds and they had horses, and a horse influenza, equine influenza, H3N8, mutated, and jumped to dogs at this racetrack. And since then, it's spread across the country in dogs.
Yes, I remember that well.
What's interesting is that the virus mutated so much in this one jump that they can't find the canine version in horses. So it was a one-way transmission, which is kind of interesting. So we now have these two H3N8 viruses, one strain in horses and one in dogs. At the same time, around the world, halfway around the world in Korea, an H3N2 from a duck in Korea mutated and jumped to dogs in Korea. And so about a year or so after it happened in Florida, it happened in Korea. Now China's got H3N2 in dogs, and it's spreading there, and it arrived here in this country last year in Chicago, and now it's spreading here.
Right. So listeners would remember that when there was outbreak of, 1,000 or more dog flu cases in the Chicago area.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I just did a blog about them looking, they said, well, if H3N2 developed in Asia and H3N8 developed in North America, and now H3N2 has come to North America, could H3N8 have gone to Asia? And so they started testing dogs. And sure enough, they found H3N8 are North American canine flu in Chinese dogs. But they weren't able to tell whether it came from dogs or it came from the H3N8 equines, because they have horses in China and in Mongolia in particular, or whether it was H3N8 from birds, because they're so close you can't tell the difference.
Right.
So we're seeing a lot of activity with flu viruses jumping to dogs when 12 years ago was considered unlikely to happen at all.
So, Mike, let me ask you a question concerning vaccines for the highly pathogenic avian influenzas for humans. Is there any news about that? Any progress going on in that world?
Well, the problem with the H7N9 virus is vaccine, and the H5N1 is that the vaccines just don't seem to work real well in humans. Back in the middle of the last decade, when H5N1 was the big concern, they came out with a vaccine, experimental vaccine. They made like 20 million doses. And they discovered they needed to make it 12 times more of the antigen in each dose than a standard flu shot, which all of a sudden meant they didn't have 20 million doses. They had a lot fewer. And so now they're looking at using adjuvants. And adjuvants are proprietary formulas that are designed to provoke the immune system to have a better response. And the concern is that there have been, concerns over whether the adjuvant could have a side effect also. I think the real point here is that even if they have an adjuvanted vaccine, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking H5N1 or H7N9 or the new kid on the block, H5N6,
right,
which is also quite worrisome, is that if we were ever to have a pandemic, it would take years to have enough vaccine to even begin to inoculate this country, or certainly not most of the world. Most of the movies and novels about pandemics, there's a last-minute hero discovery where they find out how to make a vaccine, and soon everybody's been vaccinated. Well, that's how Contagion ended a few years ago. Right. But it's so far from reality that it's just not going to happen. We don't have enough hypodermic needles, in one fell swoop to vaccinate 7 billion people.
All right, Mike, I got about 30 seconds left. Do you want to close with anything?
Only that, I don't predict that there's a pandemic on the horizon. I don't predict anything except that there will be a flood somewhere. But it's a fascinating subject, and we're learning so much more about influenza, and it's really amazing what they're able to do now compared to even 5 or 6 years ago. So if you have a scientific bent, it's something you ought to be looking at.
All right, very good. Well, Mike Coston, thanks again for this informative update, and keep up the good work on Avian Flu Diary, sir.
Okay, thank you for having me.